Hi, I'm Trinity, and today I'm going to be breaking down media biases. But not in the fake news kind of way, in a more realistic, in much more specific and more useful kind of ways. How the event gets told 5 completely different ways depending on who's telling it. I'm gonna put up a visual right here of the media biases. This is an all sides media biases chart, and it ranks outlets on spectrum from left, lean left, center, left, right, and right. Based on blind surveys, editorial reviews, and how thousands of readers across the political spectrum actually rate these outlets. The point isn't that outlets are one-sided, are lying. The point isn't that outlets on one side are lying and outlets on the other telling the truth. It's that like what stories get the headlines, which quote goes first, which words get used to describe the exact fact pattern. So I picked one story that has gotten a lot of news, a lot of traction, and that has to do with the Epstein files, and that's going to be what I'm going to be talking about. So I looked into 5 outlets across the entire spectrum, covered the exact same story, the same event, a federal judge ruling from this past week. So let's get into that. On June 25th, a federal judge, Emmett Sullivan, ordered the Department of Justice to release more Epstein files or explain to the court why they can't. Because they've been refusing to release certain files and then they unredacted the wrong paperwork. The deadline for those unredacted files or a reasoning for why they can't was July 22nd. This included emails about so-called torture video and FBI interview notes containing an unproven allegation against President Trump. The lawsuit was filed by Katie Phang, an independent journalist and former MSNBC host. Same fact, same ruling. And then here's 5 outlets across the bias spectrum that told the story. Their coverage centers the victims and the transparency angle right out the gate. They lean heavily on emotional and accountability focused language, quoting an advocacy attorney who argued the government was protecting the rich and the powerful. And you notice the word choice too. They describe a DOJ as not having conceded it broke the law. That's a strong word. It implies admission of guilt, not just ongoing legal dispute. The pathos-driven journalism, it makes you want to feel the injustice before you process the legal details. And that was all for the starting on the left. And now we're going to do the lean left, okay? These outlets are more procedural. They open with dry mechanics of court order. What has to be released by when, before bringing any emotional language. They do include the DOJ's pushback alongside the advocate for praise of the ruling, so it looks balanced. But pay attention to structure. The advocate's quote about transparency is placed last, in the most memorable spots. That's a subtle framing choice. Technically fair, but still leans the story towards one conclusion. And now we're gonna get into the center. Okay, so this one's interesting because the biases shows up in the format, not just the words. This uses like clips, labeled sections, why it matters, driven the news, that are designed to look neutral and scannable. There's very little adjective use. They include the DOJ's full denial without editorializing on top of it. I'd call this most balanced of the five, but even neutral formatting itself is a rhetorical choice. It's built to make the outlet feel objective. Now we're gonna get into the lean left. The same facts, different frame for explicitly. Okay, now we're gonna get into the lean right. Same facts, different frame. Fox explicitly describes Judge Sullivan as a Clinton-appointed judge, a detail the left and the center outlets never mention. That single phrase primes you to read the ruling as political before you even get to see what it says. They also front load the word uncoordinated. I think that's right. I don't know. Okay. When describing the Trump's allegations, softening it early, to be fair, they still quote both Fang and the advocacy group directly. They're not hiding the other side. They're recontextualizing it. Okay, so now we're gonna get into the right, okay? Here, the story shifts entirely. It's less about what's in the files and more about judicial overreach and the media's mistrust. The Washington Examiner connects Judge Sullivan to an early unrelated unreleased case involving Michael Flynn, implying a pattern of anti-Trump rulings. That's guilt by association, but applied to the judge, not Trump. Breitbart's broader coverage goes further, arguing the mainstream outlets have buried inconvenient corrections, turning the press itself into the villain of the story. The same ruling, same week, 5 completely different emotional takeaways, and every single one of them is technically accurate. Now let's get into the big legacy outlets and look how independent creators, your street journalists, are covering the same story. I found out at least 3 genuinely different approaches. So let's get into that. The first one's gonna be the transparency focused independent. Katie Fang isn't just a plaintiff in this case. She's an independent journalist who's been interviewed intensely on progressive YouTube networks. Her tone there is way more first person and urgent than the polished MS Now article about her. She frames this almost like a press freedom fight, not just a legal filing. The second one would be the right-leaning influences and what they're not covering. According to reporting that interviewed creators across the political spectrum, a lot of right-wing influencers have been quietly skipping new Epstein files released altogether. One independent journalist who studies conspiracy theories explained it pretty bluntly. Their audience is already fully on board with the administration, so there's no engagement upside in covering a story that complicates that. Where do they cover it? The framing usually shifts to calling it a hoax or a distraction. So the third one's going to be the media literacy watchdog. Some independent commentators aren't picking a political side at all. They're critiquing both sides for cherry picking. Epstein's vague, cryptic emails to support whatever narrative they already believed walking in. That's genuinely different lens than either mainstream or a partisan coverage. It's commentary about the biases itself. What's really interesting is the speed and tone, the difference. Independent creators move faster than legacy outlets. They're way more openly opinionated, and instead of claiming objectively, a lot of them build trust by just being upfront about their own biases. That's a totally different trust model than we're an objective newsroom. So how is the actual public reacting to all this? I found 5 distinctive responses that show this isn't really a clean left versus right story. One being the progressive lawmakers, Representative Ro Khanna, I don't know how to pronounce that, who co-authorized the law forcing these files to be released, publicly praised the ruling as a step forward towards justice for survivors. That's an institutional good government response from the left. 2 being the conservative lawmakers, Representative like Thomas Massie, a Republican, and the bill's other co-author, has been pushing for more disclosure, which proves transparency on the issue isn't purely left-coded demand. Some conservatives genuinely see this as a government accountability issue, separate from defending or attacking Trump. 3rd being the administrative itself. A DOJ spokesperson dismissed the ruling, accusing the judge of chasing misleading headlines. That's the classic institutional playbook when a ruling goes against you. Minimize it, reframe it, appeal it. Okay. The 4th would be the online biases that have already moved on. Based on reportings from creators who track the audience, a lot of them are Trump supporting commentary treats this story as resolved in his favor, framing his involvement as an actual him gathering information for the FBI. That's a strong example of motivated reasoning, shaping how people read the exact documents. The 5th one would be the skeptical of everyone, independent observers. Then there's a demographic that doesn't fit either team. People frustrated that both sides are selective quoting an unreliable source, Epstein himself, to support whatever conclusion they already wanted. Lawmakers, agencies, online base, watchdog, those are all 5 different reactions. And notice none of them break down into 2 teams specifically. Here's the part that I really want you to sit with. None of these platforms, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, are optimizing your feed for accuracy. They're optimizing for engagement. And outrage and confirmation are 2 most engaging emotions there is. So if your feed is mostly MS Now, clips, and progressive creators, you're getting feed and accountability and cover-up frame over and over until it feels like the obvious truth. If your feed is mostly Brett Bart adjacent content, you're getting witch hunt media, malpractice frame, and over, and that feels obvious. Same documents, opposite emotion, conclusion, and the algorithm never tells what it is filtering out. That's exactly why media rhetoric and media biases literacy actually matters. Not so it distrusts everything, but so you can recognize the moves, the framing, word choice, what's quoted, what's left out, and what order things appear in. That's the only way to see the full image in story, instead of just slices of different information from multiple people that have been construed, and that we genuinely don't know what's in those documents. The gap between a judge made a procedural ruling, and this proves my side was right all along. It basically is the whole story of media biases, and it gives you a full example.